I'm Susan Carpenter, and I am the Wisconsin Native Plant Garden Curator and Native Plant Gardener here at the UW Arboretum in Madison. And today my presentation is Bumblebee Conservation in Your Garden. So just to step back, gardening that supports bumblebees, which is mainly what I'll be talking about today, will also support many other pollinators and wildlife as well. So these other pollinators include butterflies, moths, flies, wasps, beetles, ants, and hummingbirds. But bees and the entire group of bees are the most effective pollinators. So Wisconsin has a great many native bee species. We have between 400 and 500 native bee species here in the state. And most of these species are very small, solitary species, about 85% of them. And you might not even notice them. They have small home ranges. They visit flowers. They might visit flowers that you're not familiar with. They're very tiny, as I said. But they live in a solitary lifestyle. So they're nesting either in cavities, in logs, or in small hollow stems, or in the ground. So we have a great many native bees, and those are very important to the ecosystems in Wisconsin. The 15% of our bees are social or semi-social, and you can see on this diagram that each of those squares represents a species, and that upper left corner shows you the social or semi-social bee species. And within the social species, we have the bumblebees. And I'm going to focus mostly on bumblebees today. They are very familiar to us. We have quite a few species in Wisconsin. You can see there are 20 species, about 12 to 14 of which you would find in the southern part of the state. I do want to point out that when we think about bees, we often think about honeybees. And honeybees are not a native bee in Wisconsin. They are important agriculturally. You can think of them as a domestic animal, basically. They're kept in hives and humans care for them for the most part. There's only one species of honeybee, and that's why you see it there at the on the lower left. One single species, and it is a social species, perennial species, and they originated in Europe. So those are the honeybees, just to keep that in mind. They're not native to Wisconsin, so they don't have special relationships with any of our native flora here in the state. Wisconsin bumblebees do need our help. There are 20 species, as I mentioned. One of them is federally endangered. This is the rusty-patched bumblebee, which is found throughout many counties in Wisconsin, we know now. And I'll talk a little bit later about how you can add to that information that we're gathering throughout the state. 5 more species are considered to be in species of greatest conservation need. So this means that they are showing signs of decline or are relatively rare, and they're ones that we're keeping a close eye on. And 3 more species that are circled here in black that we don't have enough information about. We just simply don't know enough about them to know whether or not they are endangered or not. We don't know what their populations are, their life histories, and where they are living. So how can we help bumblebees? The main way to do this is to plant native plants. That's a way that's accessible to all of us, usually if we have a home garden, obviously, or if we're involved with community gardens, school gardens, civic spaces, anywhere where plants can be planted and where people take care of plants. If we plant native plants, this will create habitat and bring bumblebees to the area. Then another way to help bumblebees is actually to photograph them, make discoveries yourself, and learn about bumblebees so that we can all learn more. Then after you have a number of photographs and discoveries made, joining a group like the Bumblebee Brigade, participating in that project, will help you share your photos, share your findings. You can learn more from others within that group and from the website, and then you're contributing along the way to statewide conservation projects that protect bumblebees. So, as I mentioned, the best way to create habitat for pollinators and bumblebees is to create native plant gardens. This is a pretty simple formula. We have pollinator habitat, we have native plants, we have pollinator habitat. And it's pretty surprising after you start planting native plants how quickly you will see an increase in the number of bumblebees and the number of other pollinators coming into the area as those plants start to bloom. I'll go through a few of my favorite plants. Everyone wonders what are the best plants for bumblebees. And I've drawn from several resources that I'll mention in a moment. But I want to show you some of these plants and show you some of the bumblebees that visit them. I will travel through the seasons with this little tour. And so the first one we'll start with is the shooting star. This is a very lovely plant that grows in the early spring. It can grow in prairie settings or in semi-shaded woodlands. It comes up before the leaves come up before the trees have leafed out in a forested setting. And these flowers are pendulous. You can see they are pointing downward when they're blooming. And there at the left, you can see a bumblebee in the center hanging on to the flower. And it hangs onto the flower upside down, and it creates a buzzing, a special buzzing noise with its wing muscles, and it shakes the pollen from the flower down onto the bee. And then the bee can groom the pollen from its back and front, in this case, to pack it into its pollen-carrying corbicula. And there you can see in the center, that bee has already collected a lot of pollen, and it has the pollen collected in that yellow ball there on its leg, and soon will fly back to its colony to deliver that pollen to the young of the colony. Wild geranium is another one of our spring blooming wildflowers. This is very common in oak woods, and it can be grown very well in home gardens. It provides a mass of plants like you're seeing in this photograph at the right, and the flowers are fairly open, and that will be visited by bumblebees and by other early season pollinators. A little bit later in the season here, we see the spiderwort and the downy woodmint. These are both obviously blooming at the same time during the season. And the spiderwort has an open flower. You would want to go see bees visiting spiderwort in the morning because each spiderwort flower only opens for half a day, usually. And by noon, that flower has finished blooming and is closing up. So there are a great many buds on the spiderwort, and they continue to bloom for several weeks, but each flower is only open for actually less than a day. The woodmint is a member of the mint family, obviously, and it has tiny little flowers. You can see at the right, the tiny little flowers, the bees can move around those little levels of flowers on the mint and take nectar from them. And that nectar is important to provide the bee with nutrition. The adult bees are gaining their carbohydrates, a good source of carbohydrates for the adult bees as they fly, forage, and collect more pollen for their colony. Wild roses are another spring to summer blooming flower. And these wild roses, you'll notice at the left there, are wide open flowers. They have 5 petals, a lot of stamens in the center, a lot of pollen produced there on those anthers. And the bumblebees go into the roses and use that buzzing noise again to kind of shake pollen loose as they tumble around within the roses. Those are, you might notice it's quite different from a cultivated rose that has multiple petals and doesn't really have that many stamens. So I do encourage you to look at all different kinds of roses and see which ones are being visited by the bees. There are a great many species of wild roses that can be grown easily in gardens, and they spread by rhizome around the garden, so they will increase from, say, if you just plant one of them, they will increase throughout your garden. The plant at the right-hand side of this slide is the pale purple coneflower. And this is a lovely member of the sunflower family with those strap-like leaves at the base and then tall stalks, the blooming in say June or so, and those tall stalks holding, each one holding a flowering head. And the flowering head has the drooping ray flowers that look like petals there dangling down. And then that cone in the middle is where all the pollinating will be going on, because each of those little red points there on the cone is an individual flower. And the bee that you see visiting this one on the inset is visiting the first few flowers on the cone there at the base of the cone. They're in bloom, and then they'll begin through time to bloom all the way up to the top of the cone. And so bees can be visiting this plant for quite a while, even though the details are rather small and you have to look carefully to see what's going on. The prairie clovers are a wonderful plant for pollinators. Lots of pollinators will use them, but the bumblebees especially love them. The purple prairie clover has this bright orange pollen, and you can see the two bees here kind of in this picture are gathering that pollen, and you can see how bright it is from the pollen that they're carrying. They have to move around each of those little purple individual things that you see on the column there are individual flowers, and those, each one is visited then. So the bees kind of turn sideways and run around the circle there, and then the plant will continue to bloom as time goes on. It will start at the bottom and continue to bloom up toward the top of that inflorescence. The white prairie clover doesn't have the same color pollen, but it's still a very good source for the bumblebees, and you can see how it grows in, this is actually many clumps of prairie clover growing together. It doesn't spread by rhizome, it spreads by seed. So it can be, these two plants can be grown in any area that's kind of open, full sun, medium to dry soils, even gravel, rocky soils are fine for this one. And so it's pretty easy to grow. You can grow it in a sand prairie, sand area, rock garden, those kinds of places. And then, of course, bee balm is one of the very best bumblebee plants. It's easy to grow. This is the native one, so there are some cultivated varieties you might be familiar with, but this is the lavender colored native one. And it grows, it does seed itself well, it does spread throughout an area, but it's not, when you see it blooming, you'll see it fill the area. When it's not blooming, it makes room for other plants as well. This is the picture, the close-up picture of the bumblebee visiting is the rusty patched bumblebee. This is our federally endangered bee, which we have a great deal of, or we have a lot of sightings of here in Madison and also around the state of Wisconsin. Also in Minnesota, Illinois, a few sightings in Iowa, a few sightings a little further east, but it's been lost over most of its original range. So it is pretty exciting to be tracking this one and to be involved with conserving and recovery for its populations. So bee balm has long tubular flowers, and the bumblebees usually use the tubular flower to take the nectar from the flower. The nectar's at the base of the tube, but you can see the rusty patched bumblebee at the right-hand photo there is actually puncturing the tube, and she is taking the nectar she's kind of cheating and taking the nectar directly through that hole, and that's called nectar robbing. And rusty patch is fairly unique in its behavior to nectar rob on that plant. Most of the other bumblebees will use the tube. So bee balm is a great place to do your monitoring. I'll talk about that in a moment. Here we have 2 of the 12 native milkweeds that are living in Wisconsin. The butterfly weed is the orange one, and the whorled milkweed is this white one. Those are both suited for dry areas. The butterfly milkweed can grow in a medium soil moisture as well. And they're both, of course, very, all of these milkweeds are very attractive for all kinds of insects. They have nectar, copious nectar in the little cups of the flowers, but they have a very specific pollination system. And so this pollination system is there are really only a few pollinators who can effectively pollinate milkweed, even though lots of insects will visit it. And bumblebees are one of those pollinators. And you can see the bumblebee in this picture has little golden structures hanging on its legs and hanging near its mandible. And those structures are the pollen packets from the milkweed. So when we see a bee flying around like this, we know that it's visited a milkweed, and chances are it will revisit a milkweed and be able to drop off those into the little slots on the milkweed flower where the pollen packets are received. So it's a special relationship when you have a plant that requires pollination by bumblebees or by larger pollinators. We need to have all those pollinators active in order to keep the milkweeds propagating and have them producing seed. These are the blazing stars, and again we have several species of blazing star. I have just two illustrated here. On the left is the meadow blazing star, which is a favorite nectar plant for monarch butterflies if you're interested in butterfly gardening as well. These are flower heads that you're looking at there, all scattered along this tall stem. Plants probably 3 feet tall in total height. And then at the right, we have the prairie blazing star, where the flowering heads are more clustered. The blooming there starts at the top and then works its way down the stalk. Again, these would be plants about 3 feet tall if we don't have a drought. If we have a drought, we see these plants are surviving just fine. They may be a bit shorter than than on a moister year, but they are perfectly able to grow, to handle drought, and that's one of the advantages of growing the native plants with varied weather and varied climate. These are some late summer blooming plants, so that tall white spikes. That is the Culver's root. Again, very, very good for all kinds of pollinators, but especially for the bumblebees. And then the shorter white flower in this left photo is the mountain mint, again from the mint family. And this is another great nectar plant for the bumblebees. It also has a wonderful scent to it. These would be growing in medium to moist soils, all of these plants that are shown in these two photos. So if you have an area that has a drain spout or even verging into a rain garden area, you could grow these plants very successfully. The pink one in the right-hand photo is the red milkweed, and that's another milkweed, of course, but also growing in a moister area compared to the ones that I just introduced earlier. And this is the Joe Pye weed, one of our species of Joe Pye weed. This is a very tall plant. It can get up to 8 feet tall, depending on the conditions. It does well with semi-shade. It blooms late in the summer, so it's blooming in August usually, and the flowers are clusters, and you can see in the close-up of a rusty patch visiting the Joe Pye weed that actually each of those long, narrow clusters is a cluster of individual flowers. This is a male bee, so it's kind of dusty with white pollen, and the male bees don't collect pollen, so they get the pollen on their bodies, but they don't actually pack it into packets and bring it to the nest. So they're just doing nectaring and out looking for mates at this time of year, late in the summer. And then also in August or later in the summer season, we find the bottle gentian. And there are actually several species of gentians again. The bottle gentian is this blue one, and it's a fascinating flower, very beautiful, but also very interesting as it relates to its pollination. So these flowers that you're seeing on the left there are completely and fully in bloom. The flower does not open. It's got a small opening at the top, and the petals are folded and pleated around that little opening. So a very large pollinator, like a bumblebee, has to force its way in to that little opening, pressing the petals apart, and when it gets inside, the petals close back up look just like what you're seeing in this picture. So the bee is inside, moving around, moving the pollen around to the parts of the flower, and then the bumblebee has to pop back out of the top of the flower. So this one is fun to watch if you've got bumblebees around. It's fun to watch them pollinating that one. And when the flowers are fully pollinated, you'll see they turn a kind of purple color. So some of them in the cluster are purple, and those are ones that have already been pollinated. There is another type of gentian that's not very common, but it's present in our area, and this is the cream gentian. And that one opens a little bit more at the top. The petals come apart, so you'll see the bumblebees going in and out as you see this small half-black bumblebee peeking out after being inside of that cream gentian flower. Another interesting floral structure or floral anatomy is on this white turtle head. White turtle head is another excellent bumblebee plant. And you can see that the structure of the flower requires the bee to kind of manipulate the flower a bit and kind of grab on and get itself organized so that it can pop into underneath the hood of the flower. And so this is also very entertaining to watch, but also a good way to document your bumblebees because they're sort of sitting there working the flower, and you can get some good pictures of them while they're doing that and see their identifying markings. So these are all good plants. These would all three of these plants would grow in a medium soil, and medium to moist for the case of the bottle gentian and the turtle head. Rain gardens would be suitable for both of those. And the cream gentian sometimes in a little bit drier area than the other two. And then at the end of the season, of course, we have the goldenrod and aster season, and there are dozens of species in these two groups. I'm just giving you the two here that are the longest lasting or the latest ones to be blooming. So after everything else is done blooming, we have showy goldenrod and New England aster still in bloom. So these were visited by any insects at the end of the season, migrating monarchs, bumblebee queens that have come out, just been born out of the nests. And so they're very, very valuable. And as everything else stops blooming, these are present and continue to be, the bees can kind of focus on them or become focused on them because of the lack of other resources to use in the late part of the season, so in September usually. So to create good bumblebee habitat, you want to plant many and many different kinds of native flowers that bloom from early to late in the season. So we want things right at the beginning of the season, and we want things at the end, and we want things all blooming all the way through. And usually not just one thing blooming at a time, so enough plants that we maybe have 3 different bumblebee plants blooming at the same time. And that may sound like a lot, but as you get involved with gardening with native plants, you'll tend to want to add more and more. We want to leave suitable nesting and overwintering sites. So this means that we leave some areas of loose, bare soil, some even in wooded areas. We leave chipmunk burrows and other small, like hollow logs perhaps. These would all be possible places where bumblebees would be selecting nest sites in our gardens. And we do not use insecticides, especially the systemic insecticides, which are the insecticides that are taken up in plant tissue, and they remain in plant tissue throughout the life of the plant. They go into the pollen and the nectar, so they can harm bumblebees and other pollinators through they're using the pollen and nectar for a food source. There are many places to learn more about these plants and other plants. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service has a Rusty Patch bumblebee plant list that we put together for folks to use if they're specifically interested in Rusty Patch. As I mentioned, Rusty Patch are fairly usual as bumblebees go, so anything that encourages the Rusty Patch bumblebee will also encourage lots of other bumblebee species. The Xerces Society is an invertebrate conservation organization. They have lots of plant lists. They have identification information. They also are conserving other beneficial insects besides pollinators. So that's a great resource to get a lot of good gardening information as well as information about the insects. The Pollinator Partnership has many planting guides for really all over the country, and that's a good place for some of these plant lists. And you can check, depending on wherever you live, you want to have plants that are native to that area, so you can check for your area and then make sure that you're able to source the plants that you need for your native vegetation. Native plant nurseries are also a good source of course, of materials, but also of information. So they have seed mixes for pollinators in different types of settings, and they have a lot of information about the individual species as well. And the Midwest has a lot of good native plant nurseries. I want to just look into the bumblebee life cycle for a moment here. This is something to understand because when you're gardening and you see bumblebees, where are they and where are they in their life cycle? And this is important to interpret what you're looking at when you see them. So starting up at number 1 there, right now in the winter, the bumblebees are the future queens for next year are each individually in a small cavity underground that they have dug and they're overwintering there. So they're dormant, but they have already mated. So keep that in mind that already mated females are now, future queens are now individually resting underground. In about the middle of April for southern Wisconsin, they will begin to emerge. And as they emerge, they have to come out of their hibernation place, and they have to find a suitable nesting spot. And this would be a different spot from where they spent the winter. So it would be maybe a small chipmunk burrow. And they go into there and they start to lay eggs. And when they lay the eggs, they have to bring pollen to feed the eggs. So as the eggs hatch, they begin to feed on the pollen that the queen brings back, and she is raising now her first group of worker bees for her colony. This is an annual colony. It's only going to last a year, so everything is riding on her to get it off to a good start. So the building part of the colony is from the time that she starts laying her first eggs until she's built up a good number of worker bees. As soon as the worker bees are active and adults, it takes a few weeks, then they go and do the foraging. And she can remain in the nest, the queen can remain in the nest and just lay more eggs. And the young workers will forage and bring the pollen and nectar back to the nest for the young that are still developing. About midway through the summer, the colony shifts from building up in numbers to reproduction. And reproduction is when midway through the season, the queen will start laying eggs that will become males, and she'll lay eggs that become new future queens. So what we see there at number 4 is the mating process. This is going on anywhere from July, August, September, and depending on the species and depending on the conditions of that year. And then after the queens are mated, they will go into their dormancy. So you see the mated queen there at the top. She's a very large bee. She's very fresh looking because she was just born in the end of the summer there. And then she digs underground and goes into her dormancy to start the cycle once again. So we use photography to make discoveries about bumblebees. I really recommend this because it's a great way not only to get pictures of them, but also to just learn about them, to watch them, to see what their behavior is. We learn how to identify them from our photos. We can learn about behavior. We can learn about the timing of the queen emergence and the males emerging from the colonies, so it tells us about the seasonality of the colony. And we can look at the flower use by the different species of bumblebees and by any species that we're particularly interested in. And some photography tips are to take a lot of pictures. So you want to have a good picture of the back of the bee, the side view if possible, and then maybe a front view of the bee, so a face view. And that helps us see features of the face and of the hairs on the face or the back of the head that will help us with identification, possibly. So I usually take a series of pictures of the same bee, and then I take a spacer picture so that I know that the next set of pictures would be a different individual. We can learn how to identify bumblebees. Here you can see several examples of different species with the different markings of yellow and orange patterning on their abdomens, different patterns of color on their heads and their faces and on their thorax. So these are pictures that would help us identify bumblebees, and sometimes one picture is adequate. Like each of these pictures, we could identify that bee from one picture, but often it's good to have multiple pictures to be sure. And we can document what flowers are used throughout the season. So Rusty Patch is using different flowers throughout the season, and if we can figure out what flowers they will use, which we've pretty much done with Rusty Patch now, we know what we could plant and what gaps we would want to fill if we were creating a garden or a large planting that would support them. We share our discoveries at Bumblebee Brigade. This is a DNR project. It's in its 5th year now. And so if you search for Bumblebee Brigade, it'll come up. We have online trainings, basic and advanced trainings there, descriptions of all 20 of Wisconsin's bumblebee species. We have quizzes, maps, and the IDs that you submit with your photos are confirmed by experts for you. So you have a good learning opportunity with this too. And then there's a Bumblebee Observers, Wisconsin Bumblebee Observers group on Facebook, which is also a very good resource. So I'd just like to thank all the people who make the gardens and this Bumblebee Conservation Project possible, and then all of you for your interest and for what I hope you will be interested in helping with on bumblebee conservation. So thank you very much.
Good morning and welcome back to this year's virtual spring kickoff. And we just finished learning about bumblebee conservation in our own backyard. And Susan is joining us now to answer the questions you sent in during her presentation. And as a reminder, you can keep asking those questions as we're chatting here. So thank you so much, Susan, for joining us. We appreciate it. We've got some great questions to get to.
Great. Glad to be here.
Well, our first question is coming in from Nicole on YouTube, and she's wondering, are there, of the plants you suggested, are there anything that folks could do in containers if they're growing maybe on a patio or a small space?
Yeah, that's a great question. Usually for container gardening, I find it's helpful to focus on some of those smaller or shorter plants that are suitable for dry conditions, because the container might dry down. It's important to have it in full sun if you're using those species. So something like the shooting stars could be a possibility. The prairie clovers for sure, Liatris, those would be good choices. And I would say kind of experiment with it, because some people's containers are huge planter boxes, and those you have more soil and you can kind of have deeper root systems there. And for smaller containers, you might really want to focus on the smaller plants. Another one that I didn't mention in the talk, but that would be possibly good for containers would be prairie smoke. So you could try that. And if you learn a lot about it, then be sure you share what you learn. There's a lot of interest in container gardening. So thanks for that question.
And in that similar vein, as people are thinking about the soil mixture maybe for container gardening, is sort of the conventional basic potting soil, would that work for native plants, or is there other things people should look to?
Yeah, that's a good question too. I would not fuss too much with the soil. In other words, some people think you need a rich soil and real rich compost and everything, which has more nutrients, but native plants actually don't need soil amendment like that. So regular soil might be the way to go with it. And you don't need to, you really don't need to don't add fertilizer or anything like that, because the native plants they're really working on doing a big root system instead of a lot of top growth. And the high nutrient tends to emphasize the top growth. And if you're in a garden situation, fertilizer will actually help the weedy species more than the native plants. So I think, again, that's a place to kind of experiment with what soils would work and with what is practical for you in your situation. I mean, some people don't have any soil available. So they are using, a potting mix, but I wouldn't go with anything that has fertilizer added to it or anything like that for starters.
Perfect. Yeah, and I think that's generalist good advice as well, of match the plant to the place you have rather than sort of trying to make your place fit something else. If you've got that sandy, gravelly soil, work with it. If you have clay, work with it. There's things that'll grow everywhere.
Exactly.
Natasha is wondering if you can share any resources for quality native plants and seed that you're familiar with.
Well, there's good native plant nurseries and sources here in the Midwest. I mean, we are fortunate in that regard, maybe a little bit ahead of other places in the country from what I hear from gardeners in other places in the country. So we have native plant nurseries such as Prairie Nursery in Wisconsin, Prairie Moon Nursery is in Minnesota. Agricol handles a lot of native plants. And then there are other smaller nurseries. The DNR has a listing of native plant sources and also of companies that are, able to help with installations and planning and so on. So that's a good list, and you can just look for that on the DNR website and pull that up and see what's in your area.
So Jamie is wondering, you spoke about pollen from native plants versus cultivars. If folks are maybe growing native cultivars, is there anything potentially harmful or different about a pollen in a cultivar native plant versus a straight species native plant?
Yeah. So I'm a native plant gardener, so I kind of can get around that issue by simply growing the straight species. But it is an interesting question because there are a lot of nativars available. And here's the thing, I think you need to be very specific about it, actually, like focus in. There have been some studies now done, and particularly with Joe Pyeweed, of different cultivars, and looking specifically at pollinators and how much use pollinators are making of them. So the answer is, for some species, the cultivars are actually seem to be visited more and used more. And for some species, less. So I think you want to really focus in on the specifics of the group that you're looking at. Maybe if you have a chance to visit an area where they're planted out and you can compare them or try it yourself, you can make a lot of observations in your own garden. So if you already have cultivars growing, you can compare the cultivar to the native if you have both of them, or try both of them, and just see what works in your area. You may not want to do a scientific, completely replicated scientific experiment, but you can definitely learn a lot. Sometimes the cultivars, I find, they look just like maybe a miniature version of the wild plant, the straight species. But I noticed that in some cases, there's no visitation at all. And that tells me that something about that plant is different. It's, as it's now shorter, maybe 1 foot tall instead of 3 feet tall, something's changed, and the insects are clued into that and we aren't. So a lot of your own observations will be helpful there. And also talking with people and looking into the literature a bit to see if there's information about that group.
That's excellent. And another resource I like to visit myself personally is Mount Cuba Center. They're a public garden on the East Coast specializing in native plants. They do amazing plant trials, and they also evaluate exactly what you're speaking to of, do these cultivars get the same visitation as a straight species? And those reports are free, available to anyone to check out. Again, Mount Cuba Center, really awesome resource there as well. We have a lot of questions coming in from folks about sort of design of native plants. So thinking about how to use them in a smaller urban space, or how to prevent them from, spreading, too far, or things like that. Any tips or general advice you could give on sort of, putting plants together?
Well, I think, first of all, the point that you mentioned before about making sure that the plants match the space that you're trying to garden in, that's going to save you a lot of frustration, I guess is the word I would use, down the road. Because if you have a shady spot, or you're working on the north side of a building, you want to keep that in mind as you select the plants and then as you place them. So for example, here at the garden, our visitor center is oriented east-west. So the north side of the building has actually about a 5 or 8 foot microclimate area on the north side that actually will grow woodland species, like forest woodland species. And then as you get about 10 feet away, they won't thrive. So sometimes in a small space, you have that kind of opportunity to really actually place the plants in, a special spot that just doesn't seem like it would be very much different from a few feet away, but it is, because of the, north side of the building is a little more moist. It's shaded by the building. So it has that little microclimate that you can use to your advantage. Also, in small spaces, one of the questions I get a lot is how can I keep things from flopping on the sidewalk, flopping on the paths? I don't have much, I've got a narrow bed. Just really focus on the smaller plants. So smaller grasses, like the short native grasses are lovely. And there's ones for full sun and there's ones for more partial shade. Be aware that the plant it looks small when you plant it if you're using plugs, but it's going to, think about the size it's going to reach, how it's going to arch, how it's going to, grow, like how tall it's going to grow. Is it going to flop over? And usually just scaling down to smaller sizes. We have some examples here at the Arboretum if anyone's visiting, with a circle garden in the parking lot area, the front of the visitor center, which is supposed to be kept down at about knee level and below. So those are good. Anything that gets taller than that is supposed to be kept small, and we have to kind of keep working on that just to keep it, good visibility for the parking lot. So there's just issues like that. Just what you want to see. If it's in front of your house, if you want to be able to see over it, then you're talking about a smaller profile. So you can see what sizes the plants will reach, and you can see their colors and all this. Use the nursery websites as a resource. And the catalogs as a resource for so you can help visualize it. And the plants will move around. So when our garden designer and I were planting a new shortgrass area last summer, he placed some of the forbs in drifts as he envisioned them. And I planted them, and we agreed that this was the only day the plants would be where we put them. So they will move around, and that's part of the wonderful part of native plant gardening. Some plants will move around, and don't be afraid to adjust them as you go. Right now in our garden, it's been established for some years, we manage a lot of the native plants just to make sure that the gardens are kind of keeping in the spirit of each of the areas.
And you made a great point as well about visiting the Arboretum. So no matter where people are listening or tuning in from today, I'm sure you have a public garden near you, even if it's maybe an hour or two drive. So find your nearest public garden, go check them out. Many of them have these plants on display, so you can actually see them and help you choose which plants you want to grow as well. So we have several questions coming in about pollinator hotels. And so things like, are they beneficial? Are they useful? And also sort of hygiene, do we need to change out the material? And if so, how often?
Mm-hmm. That's a great question. We hear that a lot. Those hotels are basically, just to explain for people who might not know what we're talking about, like usually little bundles of tubes or little drill holes in wood. And these are for the benefit of cavity nesting solitary bees. So there's quite a number of species of these, of our native bees here in Wisconsin, and they use cavities. So normally they'll be using hollow places in trees or little stems, like crevices, that kind of thing. And they'll just fill in, they lay their eggs, they provision their egg with the ball of pollen, they seal it off, and so on. So they're filling those little tubes in the hotels. I usually recommend to people that they think about those as a temporary project. So sure, put them together, put a bundle together. You might even use hollow stems from your own trimmings of your garden, like if you have any cup plant, you can use that for sure. It has to have a back on it. So if it's just hollow and all the way through like a straw, they won't use it. So it has to have a divider, at the back, be solid at the back. If you have one then you could use it for a season. The most common bees that I encounter using those are the leafcutter bees. So they're out in June, they're using it to provision their eggs. They fill it up, and then it just sits there until the following year. If you have one that you can open and clean, We have some of those here for demonstration purposes. You can put that, like at this time of year, you can put that container that's full of the larvae and the incipient bees into a box that has a tiny opening, like a little hole. And that's called an emergence box. So then any bees emerging out of that can go out of the box, and you can put a clean one up in your garden so that you're not encouraging disease. Now, on the other hand, they're not the only leafcutter bees, and bees are not the only ones that will use those. Sometimes you'll see little pieces of grass sticking out of those hotels, and that is the grass-carrying wasp doing the same thing, provisioning its young. So there are sometimes parasites of bees who will come to those, or predators of bees that will come to those and kind of clean them out during the season. So just because you shouldn't create those and maintain those just because you think you're going to boost populations of bees. You really aren't. The best things, the things to do to really boost the population of bees is to have natural areas available. When you cut your stems down in the spring, leave a stalk, they'll be hollow. We've seen little bees using those stalks to provision and then, and then have their young develop over the coming year. So having natural places and having that out in your yard just scattered around will not lead to the fact that if you have them all in one place, a predator just comes and gets everything. They are interesting to watch. They're interesting to document. We had a film making crew out here with the osmia, filming osmia nesting in those types of tubes. So there's really a lot of educational benefit to it because you can see bees that normally might not even notice. But as far as the cleanliness goes, I would just do a simple bundle, and then you can scatter those when they're full of their larvae. You can scatter them out at this time of year, just out around your garden, and then create a new bundle for this year.
So we have a lot of still great questions coming in, and we're sort of rounding into the final moments here, but I've got an interesting sort of detective question from Carrie, and they're saying they have a wooden deck that's about 10 years old, and they're noticing that, or they've seen bees sort of drill into that wood. Not sure what type of bees they are, but they're noticing bees now lying dead on the deck. They don't use any insecticides in their garden, so they're wondering what might be happening, if you have any idea.
Okay, well, if the bees are drilling into the deck, I'm going to suspect carpenter bees. And carpenter bees are distinguishable from bumblebees. They look similar, sort of superficially, but if you look at them, you might want to look up the difference between them. The carpenter bee has a very wide head compared to a bumblebee, so that would be one way to tell. And bumblebees don't drill into wood. So if you see that happening, it's probably a carpenter bee. As to why they're dying, possibly, and this is a wild guess because I really don't know any history of this or haven't heard of it before, but if they're drilling into treated wood, perhaps that's an issue. Decks are often built of treated wood. So that might be something to look into. If you could get a picture of the bees that are doing the drilling, that would verify what they are. And then I guess sometimes we see dead bees just because it's like the end of the season or something. I don't know what time of year this drilling is happening. It's happening right now or was last year. Sometimes, the bees with annual colonies will die at the end of the year. And so you might see something, that might be another reason. But I'd suspect if the listener thinks it's related to the drilling, that it might be the treated wood. That would be a great thing to investigate more. In fact, I'm going to be looking it up as soon as I can.
And that was my guess as well. If it was treated lumber, there's some chemicals in there which could be toxic as well. In the last couple moments here, again, several questions coming in about if people have plants in their gardens already, say hosta or clover, white clover, that they're noticing bees are going to and are spending time with. Do they need to remove them, or is it okay to sort of keep those around if they're being visited, even if they're not maybe a straight native species?
Of course. If you're a native plant gardener, you don't do that because you're growing a native plant garden. But for gardeners in general, I just encourage people to kind of look at their garden as, is their garden a living place? Is their garden supporting life? And if you see that nothing's being if nothing's visiting a certain plant, then my personal idea is why not replace it with something that is? And so obviously there are non-native plants that are great pollinator resources. There are non-native plants that are not invasive in the environment, largely, written like hostas are not going to take over anything. And so, yeah, I think whatever you can grow in your garden that that you like and that you want to foster and that you see fosters life is I'm all for it.
Perfect. And actually, one more question will sneak in here as well.
Okay.
Someone was wondering, they noticed that you mentioned shooting star will do well in a shadier condition. If you could pick, like, say, 2 or 3 other plants for folks with shady yards, are there plants they could really look to that would be great choices?
Well, the plants that do well, I mean, we have to make the distinction between shade and semi-shade, or heavy shade, but at the edge. So all the savanna species could be quite good to use. Even Culver's root will grow well in a semi-shaded. Joe Pye weed will grow there in a semi-shaded area. So as long as it's not deep shade, if you have deep shade, then you're pretty much limited to the spring ephemerals, if they're suitable there, or to flowering trees like a basswood would be excellent for bumblebees, and to some of the late season aster, like Short's aster that can grow in the woods, or zigzag goldenrod that can grow in the woods. But a deep shade is going to be challenging to get that full span of native plants growing throughout the season. And I mean, people who grow in deep shade often comment on not having flowers in there during the peak of summer. So.
And as I like to say too, anything is better than nothing too. So even if we only have flowering in the spring, that's better than no flowering, of course.
Yeah, and as we said, you match the plants to your site, and then you never know, if you lose a big tree, all of a sudden you have a lot of open space, so you're ready with some other species that can fill that.
Yep.
gap, literally and temporally.
New opportunities, absolutely. Well, Susan, thank you again so much for joining us today, sharing your expertise with us. We really appreciate it.
Thanks, Ben. Bye.
And as a reminder to all of you, we're just getting started with our virtual spring kickoff. There is a lot more to come yet this afternoon. And also a reminder that this event is made possible with your support and your contributions. Because of you, we are able to offer this free and accessible event. And so you can help us continue this work right now when you visit wigardenexpo.com and click on donate. We appreciate any amount you're able to contribute. Thanks so much and stay with us. There's more to come.